And now, it's time for the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show with Snowden Bishop. Listen in as Snowden interviews cannabis industry pioneers, marijuana experts, policymakers, medical practitioners, patients, and other amazing individuals with compelling stories to share. It all happens right now. Here's the Cannabis Reporter, Snowden Bishop.
Evergreen is calling.
Hi, and welcome back to the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show. I'm Snowden Bishop, and I'm happy you could join us. With all of the political chaos dominating the news cycles lately, some of the most consequential policy changes aren't getting the media attention they deserve. I mean, some of the most monumental rollbacks of environmental regulations and consumer health protections happen almost daily under the radar. For example, just this week, the Environmental Protection Agency announced that it would restrict the amount of scientific data that can be used to craft public health policy. I mean, really? This falls on the heels of the USDA dismissing hundreds of scientists who inform safe practices in agriculture and executive orders to undo vital public health legislation such as the Clean Air Act earlier this year. It comes as no surprise, considering that all the data related to climate change was deleted from the public-facing EPA website in 2017, as if that would erase the science behind it or give credence to climate denial. For the past couple of decades, there's been a groundswell of science warning us of impending doom related to our contributions to climate change that has gone largely underreported in the media until recently. And it's starting to get some attention because in the last couple of years, we've seen a dramatic rise in cataclysmic climate events, with whole regions being obliterated by massive hurricanes, tsunami-like storm surges, thousand-year floods, and catastrophic wildfires. Despite the valiant efforts of environmental nonprofits and niche media outlets covering the work they do, mainstream media has been slow to connect the new normal with man-made causes with any sense of urgency. And with all the positive reporting about the benefits of enacting the Green New Deal, there's just as much propaganda from the climate deniers about how it won't work. It's pie in the sky, unrealistic, inconvenient. You'll have to trade your car for a bicycle and lose your job if you work in a coal mine. But it's important for anyone making a judgment about the Green New Deal to understand that those who are producing the negative propaganda about it have a vested interest in making sure it doesn't succeed. Not ironically, they hail from the same corporate sectors that convinced the public and Congress to ban cannabis in 1937. Why? Because those industries sought to eliminate competition for the new fossil fuel industries to make paper, textiles, composites, fuel, and nearly everything else that was once made with hemp. Not to mention pharmaceuticals, which largely replaced medicinal cannabis at the same time. Since then, the damage caused by the prohibition of hemp and cannabis has caused a major health crisis, and unless we reverse course now, it will only get worse. How we go about doing that is returning to more organic ways of creating the products we've come to rely on as a society. The Green New Deal is a great way to start, but I'm convinced that cannabis is a key component that will make the Green New Deal truly green. And that's the topic of today's show, and my guests have some great ideas about how to make that possible. Trent Pash and Mike Lewis are co-founders of Third Wave Farms, a company that has set out to revitalize America's rural economies with game-changing new technology and regenerative agricultural practices. They met while working on a project with a company developing CBD products, and through this project came numerous discussions about the challenges and opportunities in hemp. A friendship was born, and soon after that, Third Wave Farms was formed. Trent hails from Oregon, where he was raised in a farming family. He's achieved a great deal of success in the food industry, starting in sales and working his way up through executive leadership positions. As CEO of Third Wave, Trent oversees the C-Team business development strategies and raises capital for the company's expansion. Mike is a third-generation farmer from Farmington, Maine, and having served in the Army, he later founded Growing Warriors, which is a veteran-oriented security project. In 2014, he began growing hemp for the Kentucky Pilot Program while serving on the Kentucky Hemp Commission. He then became the first federally permitted hemp farmer in the U.S. since Prohibition and worked to help pass the 2014 Farm Bill. He has since won numerous awards for his innovations in agriculture and currently serves as treasurer on the board of the Hemp Industries Association. Welcome to both of you. I'm grateful you could join me, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So I was really intrigued by Third Wave, and the reason is that, as I said in my opening, I am a big believer that hemp is key to a carbon neutral future and the importance of getting back to a hemp infrastructure. So I was really very intrigued by what you're doing at Third Wave. So before we get into that, though, tell me a little bit about yourselves. Trent, tell me a little bit about you so that our audience understands where you're coming from.
Sure, yeah. So my background is primarily the last 20 plus years I've been in the food and ingredient space, commodity supply chain for food ingredients. I started out, believe it or not, in the culinary field, 1991, and worked my way up through the ranks there, and then found my way into a sales job with a food company. And from there, just started going into the supply side of things with a seafood company, and then eventually running a trading desk out here in Oregon for a commodities firm, primarily sourcing edible oils and seeds for different food companies, such as Costco, Walmart, a lot of brands that are in the natural food space. I was really a part of that whole non-GMO movement, as well as organic and more sort of sustainable products throughout this food supply chain. And that's actually how Mike and I met, was when I was on a consulting project for a company in Southern California. And Mike and I had our first introduction there.
And Mike, how about you? How did you get your start into this?
Well, into hemp accidentally, quite accidentally and blindly. My background has been in farm advocacy, and trying to create, economic infrastructure for rural communities like, the one I live in, right? I mean, I drive my kids, 30 miles a day for school because there's no jobs and tax revenue to support decent schools in my community. And so that's where I came into hemp. I was trying to replace some of the missing tobacco revenue from the tobacco buyouts, and that sort of gutted all the agriculture in rural Appalachia and sort of the Burley Belt. I really came into hemp looking for ways to create infrastructure. And in 2013, when I met then Agriculture Commissioner, now Congressman Comer, on a separate project for veterans, a Homegrown by Heroes labeling scheme. We started talking about the needs for infrastructure, and we started talking about hemp. And the thing that I was hearing was that one of the negative points that they were throwing at us was there's no rural infrastructure to process this. And I'm thinking, well, duh, that's what we need in rural communities, is we need jobs and infrastructure to process. And so that's how I came into hemp. And I think that, that was the mindset I came into when I met Trent and we started Third Wave.
It's interesting that you mention Congressman Comer. We had him on the show about 2 years ago when he was pushing the hemp legislation. And it's really interesting how far we've come since then, because who knew that it seemed like it happened so suddenly when the hemp legislation actually passed as part of last year's Farm Bill. And I think that with the legalization of hemp, we have some huge opportunities to start bringing jobs into rural communities that have once depended on like coal production, for example, or tobacco, like you said, and really build this out. But what do you think is missing right now I mean, aside from the obvious, there's an infrastructure that is needed to be able to process hemp into commodities that can replace those made with fossil fuels, for example. But what do you think is the big step that is needed right now that can either be solved with legislation or just with education in order to pursue this greater goal of having hemp become a much bigger part of the supply chain for these products?
Well, I mean, I think from my perspective, and Trent's may be very different. I think that's part of why we work so well together. But the first thing we have to think about is how we build this out, right? Because as we see it playing out right now, we're seeing really big companies centralizing processing and centralizing manufacturing, right? And that's what got us where we are. So it's almost like from my perspective, what I see is us taking this amazing potential and immediately trying to shift it as quickly as we can into the business as usual system that gutted my town's economy in the first place, right? So, I mean, the first thing is, how do we decentralize this, and how do we make sure that the communities have a vested interest in how we implement this? Because our fossil fuel problem isn't just driven by production. It's driven by consumption, manufacturing, and distribution. And my concern is if we go too quickly, then we're taking away the ability for communities and cooperatives and things of this nature to start taking root in these rural communities. And I think, that's how we have to look at this first and foremost. And so the answer is we have to figure out how to pass common sense legislation that protects rural communities that want to invest in cooperative infrastructure for their farmers, that supports a carbon neutral growth for this industry.
Yeah, and I totally agree with Mike, even though we come from different worlds, and I think that's part of our synergy is that, I made the joke odd couple, but, we just come at it from two different ways, but then somehow we meet in the middle and understand each other. So it's been a really great relationship in that sense. But I think it's, being a hemp company and thinking that hemp can be a total solution for this, I don't think that's the answer. I think it's part of the solution, but it's definitely, a much bigger issue than just looking at converting hemp over as a main source for everything. It's not the total solution, but it's certainly part of it.
Well, at least for now, it's not the total solution because obviously, like you said, the infrastructure still needs to be built out. But when you look back on history and how the founding fathers of our nation actually depended upon hemp for so many things and really saw it as a path to prosperity for not just the farmers, but for everyone. And, when you look at how much virgin pulp is being used to make disposable papers, for example, paper towels and toilet paper, for the most obvious, and how we use petrochemicals to make disposable plastics, that are part of everyone's household and, comprise like at least 50% of the trash that's taken to landfills. I mean, it would seem that hemp would provide such an obvious answer to those problems, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. Go ahead, Mike.
No, I mean, absolutely it does. I mean, and even if you just think about but, to Trent's point, I mean, just in terms of it being in a crop rotation, right? I mean, having it in a solid crop rotation, is going to eliminate, significant amounts of carbon being emitted. I mean, 15 or 16% of our carbon emissions globally can most definitely be contributed to bad farming practices. So, proper farming practices, and like you said, then using the residue from those proper farming practices to put into paper for, manufacturing and all of that. I mean, the potential is amazing. And I don't think any of us deny this. Anybody with common sense wouldn't deny that the potential is amazing, but I think that the struggle that I always face is how are we realizing that potential, and, how do we create something that it's not just sustainable for the land, but sustainable for, for the communities that are doing this good work, you know.
I was going to just add that, supply and demand is sort of the economic driver that picks winners and losers. And I think with hemp, there's obviously a risk to some of those current chosen winners in the market, I would say, that